So I'm very flattered to be here today, as this enables me actually for the first time to share the stories and the voices of the forced migrants I've been working with a wider audience outside of academia. And as you might hear, like Millie, I'm actually also a migrant. I hate the term expat because it sort of makes us sort of like superior beings just because we were born in a wealthy country or because we are highly educated. I came to Leicester as the university gave me the exciting opportunity to conduct research on something I'm actually very passionate about, making the voices of forced migrants heard and rethinking this thing we call borders of nation states. So why is it that if you were born in a particular country, you have lesser rights to move, to be mobile? So the last half year, you've seen a lot of stories in the media of the so-called European refugee crisis, of mostly Syrians, but also Iraqis, Afghans, people from other countries trying to find asylum in Europe. But today I want to zoom out with you and have a look at the broader picture. In fact, 80% of the refugees in the world are not located in Europe, but in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. I will have a look at the Middle Eastern region, and in particular, I will have a look at Jordan. Jordan, like Lebanon and Turkey, hosts large numbers of refugees. Jordan hosts a total of, or at least, because it's always difficult to get a clear insight in these figures, 700,000 refugees on a total population of 7 million. This includes 50,000 people, at least, from Iraq. For another project I was involved in, I was in Satari refugee camp where mostly Syrians are living. And there was a Syrian artist whose work actually travels around the world. He has expositions in Washington, and I have some of his artwork. I'm very proud of that. Well, he's actually stuck in the refugee camp, so if he can't travel, but his art can. So that's actually also one of the linkages I wanted to make with this exposition, is the very fact that people's stories, people's art can travel and should travel to make his story heard. So most of the people in Jordan are actually urban refugees. They live in apartments among their host population. So, for instance, this is Amman, and you see a lot of satellite TVs, satellite dishes. So, when I was in Jordan for the first time in 2012, working with mostly Iraqi refugees, mind you, this was before the large influx of the Syrian refugees, I came to understand two things. First, they all had smartphones while I was still walking around with my old Nokia. And second, the TV was always on. Well, both observations sounds familiar to anyone who had ever been in the Middle East and probably in many other places of the world. I became intrigued by this experience of being stuck while also being connected to a broader part, to the rest of the world. And I want to ask you, why is it that we tend to see refugees only as vulnerable victims or as cunning crooks? Why is it so difficult to imagine that refugees own smartphones or do not start their travels being poor? Actually, to leave your country, to flee your country, you actually need money, meaning that the poorest people actually do not become refugees, but become IDPs, internally displaced persons. Sorry, I lost my track. So, last year I lived for my research for 9 months in Jordan, and I conducted research among Iraqi refugees in Jordan. Some are new arrivals, having fled for ISIS, and others have been living among the Jordanian host populations for over 10 years. What is important to know about refugee protection in Jordan, or being a refugee in Jordan, is the very fact that it's formalized as temporary. It precludes the right to work or the option to obtain Jordanian citizenship. This means you can either wait to be resettled to a so-called third countries, but it's uncertain whether this will ever happen and slots are limited, or you can find other legal and illegal ways to travel. But if the money runs out whilst waiting, you can risk going back to Iraq or finding an informal job with the risk of being deported. Like the people you see on the news navigating their journeys with the help of their smartphones, the people in Jordan are also connected to what's going on in the rest of the world. And this resonates in their everyday life and how and where they see their future. So we want to give you the stories of 3 remarkable people. And actually they're not that remarkable. Well, they are, but every person actually is. That is what I was going to say. So I want to have a look at Tariq, Omar, and finally Amal. This is actually Tariq's father. Tariq is a very charming 21-year-old Iraqi. He has been in Jordan for 4 years, after they fled Syria, where they spent 5 years as refugees. During his short life, Tariq actively remembers having said goodbye to 78 of his friends, including his sister. Some left illegal, but most of them got resettled, as there was a quite extensive resettlement program for Iraqi refugees to the United States because of the involvement in the situation in Iraq. But Tariq's family didn't get resettlement, and it's very difficult to get insight into the reasons why. He asked himself, and I quote, "I want a nice, quiet life. Why? I'm not a terrorist. I want a good reason. Am I a terrorist?" I started asking myself, even my parents. We started to think of ourselves in a very bad way. So I wanted to share this quote with you to sort of show that he starts to how ideas are becoming internalized in that sense. Tariq stayed connected with the people who traveled through Facebook. He owns a laptop, but he's reluctant to tell anyone, as he is aware that this doesn't fit with the image people have of refugees. And when I ask him about traveling illegally, he tells me he wouldn't be able to leave his parents alone, because he knows the suffering they had when his sister left. Besides, they don't have the money, as they have spent it all waiting in Jordan. Eating themselves, this is called. Tariq now has an informal job in a mobile shop, where every day he's actually scared of being deported. Then there's Omar. Omar was once a successful engineer in Baghdad. He knows stories like the one of Tariq, and far from waiting idle, he's actually very active of seeking a way out. He enrolled himself for the special US program because he used to work for the US Army, and he tried to apply directly for several embassies. But when the televised media started to cover the European refugee crisis, he increasingly started to think about traveling illegally, I mean. He used different Facebook groups to inform himself on how he could travel in the safest way, and even taught his wife how to swim. But he also wonders, and asked me, how is it that the UN and Europe is rewarding illegal behavior, while they, who are waiting in a legal manner, abiding the rules of borders, don't get any help? Eventually he left. He told me how difficult the decision was, just because his main reason to go was in fact to give his daughters a safe future. But what if something would happen on the way? Whereas the full picture is quite technical, he said that the elusive program of the UN resettlement program actually broke our spirits, and I started to think about the sea. I visited him and his gorgeous family in Germany, where he's now safe and sound. But again, waiting for the refugee status determination. And finally, I want to share with you the story of Amal. Amal is a 24-year-old woman, and she actually found a legal way to get out of Jordan. She's married to an Iraqi who holds Norwegian citizenship, and soon she hopes to be allowed to join her husband. But what she thought would be 6 months have already been 1.5 years. In the waiting time, Amal's husband visited her regularly. She became pregnant and gave birth to a baby girl. But at the moment that she requested for what is called family reunification, she didn't have a daughter. And apparently Norwegian bureaucracy takes time. So when Amal is finally accepted to go to Norway, her daughter is not allowed to join her. My aim in sharing these stories is to show how deeply confusing this entire system is, yet how people do, in a way, try to make sense, go on with their lives and maneuver. Western policies are still focused on containment far away, keeping out strangers, but we can question how feasible, let alone how humane these policies are. Dutch policies, for instance, continue to emphasize the need for regional support, while the UK resettlement program is merely a joke. Can we truly expect the region to improve rights and opportunities if Western countries, who actually have signed the Refugee Convention, do not do the same? I would argue that Europe's wealth is in fact still related to its and neo-colonial past. Disconnecting ourselves from their issues or simply giving money is not a solution. Any prohibition, as Ambrose already said as well, is in fact part of the problem, not part of the solution. Perhaps it's time to give up some of our privileges to live in a world that is more like the one we actually want to live in. Whilst Europe is bickering over floods or swarms, whether they are generally refugees and how they will alter Europe, we need to say something. Of course Europe can deal with a massive influx of refugees. 28 EU member states hold responsibility for a refugee population that is in fact smaller than the number of refugees in Lebanon alone. What we see in fact is a reluctance to welcome Muslims. Islam has become politically toxic, and the attacks in Paris and the sexual assaults in Cologne has only further implicated refugees. Amal, Tariq and Omar are all Muslims. Yes, security threats are real, and they know that very well. And it further affects them as Tariq is frustrated with ISIS because he knows that that is now how people in Europe see his religion. It affects Omar, who is a conservative Muslim. He doesn't feel comfortable with shaking women's hand, but he's shown me more respect than most Western men do, I must say. Last time I was giving a talk about my research, and a PhD student expressed the pity she felt for the refugees and how my story affected her. Whereas I perhaps should be flattered, it sounded so patronizing to me. It implies a certain superiority, an idea that if we, Europe, the West, give support, it will be fixed. It implies that people should be grateful. Instead, I'm aiming for compassion and care. A care that is self-evident as it comes forth out of our ideas of how we want this world to be. A care that is not naive, but that is respectful. A care that does try to change the world together, also in line with the hopes of Tariq, Omar, and Amal, and so many others. And from that care, I hope we can rethink how we can continue to see refugees as fellow human beings to whom we are all connected. Resilient creatures that hold on against all odds, as you can also see in this exposition. Thank you. Thank you.